Welcome to Beyond Realtime. If you're a fan of Realtime like me, you love the show and you like it when Bill or a guest calls out nonsense, like poor arguments, misinformation, fallacies, and so on. However, with each episode, I find that some things I would like to see get called out don't. And there are good reasons for that. You never get to say everything you want in a live exchange, for one thing. And to his credit, Bill likes to have guests who would disagree with him, and you can only be so tough on them if you want a contrarian guest on your next show. That's where Beyond Realtime comes in. I have no such constraints, and I have the luxury of examining the conversation offline. In addition to the call-outs I mentioned, I'll also try to expose like dirty rhetorical tactics and disingenuous behavior whenever I notice it. So I hope you enjoy watching this as much as I enjoy making it. Realize I probably am not surprising you with great insights beyond what you already. I understand that Bill's audience is smart, and maybe you'll recognize. I'm hoping you'll recognize a lot of what I say. But the idea is they didn't call it out, and if you like to hear it called out, here's your chance. Of course, you should watch each real-time episode with its overtime segment before watching Beyond Real-Time, because I'm just going to be showing short clips, and you won't get nearly the quality of experience you will watching his show. But this is just sort of a supplement after the fact. So this first program looks at the September 6th episode and its overtime segment. And in the first segment I'm going to show you, Bill is explaining that he thinks the Iran deal is good, and McMaster disagrees with him. So let's hear it.
Uranium was reduced by 98% until 2031. The R&D, research existing facilities redesigned so they could not produce weapons-grade plutonium. International inspectors allowed to access any site in the country anytime they wanted. What do you want? This is what negotiations are. You're not going to do better than that.
No, actually, you could do a lot better than that by not.
You could, but not have the other side agree to it.
But I think sometimes what happens is our diplomats, when they're faced with the opportunity to get a deal, they think that they should just make concession after concession, and the deal itself is an achievement, when in fact, in this case, it was a political disaster. For the reason is that really none of those really weak parts of the agreement, because there's sunset clause, were adhered to by the Iranians. As soon before the ink was dry, Bill, they said, "Hey, here's all the list of sites you can't visit." And so the verification regime was very weak. It essentially gave a regime who you cannot trust. We know that from a 4-decade plus proxy war.
You can't trust anybody. That's why you have this in the treaty.
But it was inadequate verification.
Okay, that's nonsense. First of all, I don't think anyone buys the argument that the politicians made this deal just because they wanted to get a deal and kept making all kinds of concessions just so they can get a deal. That's nonsense. Nobody would do that. But more importantly here, and by the way, I'm going to try to talk fast just because I think you want me to do that. You don't want to sit and listen to me drone on and on and on. So I'll be talking fast. You can always slow down the video if you want, but that's why I'm talking fast, or I'm going to try to. It's a ridiculous argument to say that, the verification was bad, because as soon as the ink was dry, they started listing all the things that the sites that we couldn't visit. That's not poor verification. That's excellent verification in the deal, but they reneged. And if they reneged, we have the right to renege. However, that's not what that wasn't the reason Trump gave for pulling out of the deal. The world would respect it if he said, they reneged on the deal, so we're going to. Nobody in the world expects us to unilaterally continue supporting a deal that somebody else is not honoring. However, we all know that Trump's reason for getting out of the deal was simply that Obama thought it was a good deal. So of course Trump has to try to make everybody think he's smarter than Obama, and so it must be a bad deal. I'm sure I bet a year's salary that he never even read the thing. Okay, let's go to the next clip. They're talking about Russian interference adversely affecting our democracy. Let's listen in.
this is a huge fucking deal.
It is a huge deal.
Because foreign disinformation is trying to undermine our democracy. And the fact that this most recent indictment that shows that a lot of conservative influencers were parroting Russian talking points and being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars. That is a real problem when all of a sudden all these self-styled nationalists who are doing the bidding of foreign adversaries who want to weaken democracy, that is just how crazy it is. And it explains how a lot of good people have been duped by Donald Trump. And all this sort of anti, frankly, American rhetoric that is designed to divide us. And that's why I think people are just so damn frustrated. We have a revolt of the reasonable on our hands, and it's about damn time.
I'm not with the idea that we wouldn't be divided if it weren't for Russians trying to meddle in our society. We've been divided the entirety of of our history. We're divided since the revolution, divided during the revolution. That's why, a huge amount of people fled to Canada.
Okay, but that's a straw man argument. No one's arguing that we're not divided. This is a different argument.
Okay. Kudos to Bill for recognizing the straw man argument. I want to make sure that everybody knows that term. You may have heard it before. I want to make sure everyone's clear on what exactly that means. So I'll be fast because most of you probably do. Straw man is a fake man. It's an image of one, but it's not real. It's fake. So when somebody conflates what your argument is and makes it ridiculous, that's a straw man argument. So another example would be something like person A says, we should try to rehabilitate nonviolent offenders instead of just locking them up. And then his opponent says, so we should just let criminals roam free. That's conflating what he said, that no, we should try to rehabilitate. They could still be incarcerated, but try to rehabilitate them. And you're conflating it into something that's ridiculous and absurd. And you do that on purpose to make the person try to sound absurd when that's not really their argument. In this particular case, it was a particularly interesting example of a straw man argument. And I'm going to say this very quickly because I don't want to bore people to death. You can look it up afterwards offline. But his mistake in this case is, in logic, you have the original statement, A implies B. And then there are three other statements that kind of are associated with it. The inverse, not A, implies not B. The converse, B implies A. And the contrapositive, not B, implies not A. You can look that stuff up. But it's true that the statement and its contrapositive always have the same truth value, and the same do the inverse and converse. But in this case, Lowry is thinking that the inverse and the original statement, have to have the same truth value. And just to make that real, let's say that I make an initial statement that says, if it rains, my driveway gets wet. So the inverse of that would be, if it does not rain, then my driveway did not get wet. That would be the inverse of the statement. Well, if you think about that, those don't have to have the same truth value. I can go out there with a hose and get it wet. So that's what Lowry was saying. The original statement that they're making, the argument they're making, is Russian interference is harming our democracy. And Lowry comes along and says, I don't agree that if Russia did not interfere, that it would not harm our democracy. We wouldn't be a divisive nation. So he's assuming that the original implication, Russian interference implies divisiveness, and its inverse, if Russia did not interfere, we would not have divisiveness. He's assuming that they have to have the same truth value. Basic logic mistake there. They don't, and kudos for Bill for picking up on that. Okay, going on to the next segment. Lowry is trying to show that Trump is a strong, feared leader, and Avalon disagrees with him. Let's listen in.
defense of Vladimir Putin, right? I mean, it used to be a Republican was you stood up to Russian aggression. And then all of a sudden Donald Trump came on and people said, well, not so much, right? And all of a sudden you see these talking points making their way into Congress. And, they've jumped the shark on this stuff. And this is just evidence, right? When the Russians were like Tucker Carlson's visit to the supermarket, that's a little bit too much even for us.
I reject all this stuff. I argue against it all the time. But the fact is, Donald Trump, he gave lethal arms to the Ukrainians. Vladimir Putin did not. Why stop? Vladimir Putin did not invade Ukraine on Donald Trump's watch. Our enemies feared us under Donald Trump.
No, they thought he was a patsy that they could do whatever they wanted.
Why didn't they take Ukraine then?
Because they were waiting for a second term. Oh, please, look. What has happened in this administration, NATO has expanded under this administration. The international community has rallied to stop Russian aggression. And Republicans have been protesting that and criticizing Ukraine and taking too many. 6 months, Ukrainians twisted in the wind while Republicans held up aid for Ukraine while they were defending for democracy.
The new aid package passed with bipartisan majorities in both houses. All right, and the idea that the people we have now in charge,
Donald Trump has given the green light to Putin.
Took Crimea under Obama. And then they invaded Ukraine under Biden. Why did that happen?
Dick Cheney just endorsed Kamala Harris for president in part because
this is why it's difficult to be for Donald Trump. So.
Okay, there are 2 quick points I want to make here. First of all, this is a good example of people call people talking past each other. They're each throwing truths at each other. They're saying things that are technically true to try to make their case, but then there are always going to be true things the other person can say, and it looks like it's a wash. So it's just 2 people disagreeing. A better approach, something that I wish would be enforced, would be utilized more often, is instead of just throwing your truth at somebody, ask them to defend what they just said. So in this case, or if they've ignored what you said, hold them to it. So for example, when Avalon was saying that the Republicans let Ukraine twist in the wind for 6 months, Lowry comes in and says, "Oh, but they passed it with bipartisan agreement." Yeah, eventually, ask him, say, should that have happened? Can you understand the damage that was done, the people that died because of that delay? Do you agree that should not have happened? And of course, he's going to keep trying to say, "But they did this afterwards." That's not answering my question. Can you answer that question? Can you understand that caused harm? Get him to acknowledge something that you just said or deny it, whatever, but get him on record doing that rather than just let him say something that's true that seems to nullify it. I wish that would happen more often because this talking past each other gets you nowhere. Nobody's going to win that argument. The second point I want to make is that this happens so often. This not calling out correlation versus causation. He's trying to point out why this happened while Obama was in office. So that makes him, things happen. Foreign affairs can happen to you, not because of you. And you need to pursue that more specifically and try to get somebody to make the case that the president caused what happened, not just he was in office when it happened. It's kind of like, somebody saying, "Hey, did you hear about that boat that blocked the Suez Canal? And what about that boat that brought down that bridge in Philly?" I'll say one thing: we didn't have rapscallion boats wreaking havoc around the world when Trump was in office. I mean, it's that ridiculous an argument unless you back it up and make the causation. And you should force people to make that causation. Don't just let them point out the correlation and get away with it. Okay, this next segment is another example of people talking past each other, but more intensely. And Lowry introduces a common deceptive tactic that I want to point out. So let's listen in.
I'm worried about rewarding someone who tried to Yeah, you're damn right.
So you're worried about the institutions of this country.
Yes.
You have a Democratic Party now that is committed to court backing. right?
No,
is that
that's actually
not a threat?
that's
That's
bullshit.
committed to eliminating the filibuster. Is that
No,
is that
that's
a threat at all?
bullshit.
You have a
That's
president of the
not
United
true.
States who
Those things aren't true.
refused to enforce the laws at the border. Does that
That's what
concern you?
you're- that's not true either.
You had a
Everything
president,
you're
you
saying
had a
is not
president of
true.
the United States who legislated and funded on his own a massive student loan program
Hold
that
on,
was clearly
hold on. Give me a
illegal.
second.
Do
You
any
tell
of
me
these
really
worry you?
first-
Do any-
but
you say you're not on a
if
team,
they were
but you won't criticize your own side.
By the way, we absolutely need to pass the bipartisan border security bill. If Donald Trump pulled the plug on it, I would vote for it on day one because we need strong borders.
So what happened the first 3.5 years?
I think Biden was too slow to take action on the border. But when we had a
denied it was a
bipartisan border
crisis for
security
3.5
bill,
years
Trump
until they
pulled the
realized
plug
there's a
because
political
he didn't
problem.
want bipartisanship to get credit. I think the big difference is we know bipartisanship the solution, and too many folks on the far right do whatever Donald Trump says, and they think bipartisanship's the problem. That's what we need to do is rebuild the middle of our politics.
Was that Joe Biden could do it on his own if you're serious about it. And what happened?
No, that's
when it didn't
not
pass,
the
what happened?
You could
He
stop
took
fentanyl,
unilateral
stop
action.
trafficking, strengthen our border security. That's what should have gotten done, and it will get done. And we shouldn't play
But when
politics with border
Biden
security.
said he didn't have the authority to do anything on his
Okay.
own on the border,
I
is
have a
correct?
much more important.
Pass the law. Pass the law.
Well, there's one answer to the question.
Pass the law.
Can't you two see you're in love?
It's everything. I wanted to take on after this
No,
call.
it's
My
like
first call will be to John to
Every
make up.
position, it's so fucking boring. Every position has to be so maximalist. Everything you guys both said, I could argue either side because there's nuances to either side that you just don't want to acknowledge. Here's my question. Yesterday,
Okay, so this is another example of people just talking past each other, and Lowry did something, I guess, for lack of a better term, I'd call bulldozing. I guess others have called it Gatling gun or whatever. The idea of just making all these different points, boom, 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 and Avalon is correctly pointing out that's true. That's not true. That's a lie. That's bullshit. He's correctly calling him on it, but think about that tactic, letting somebody just sit there and throw one thing after another, and you say it's not true, but he's still making all his points. And he's spending all of his time saying all this stuff, and you're just saying it's not true. He's spending 10 seconds saying something ridiculous. You spend 2 seconds saying it's not true. It's kind of like in football, time of possession. If they're holding the ball 5 times more often than you are, they're winning the game. And same kind of thing happens here. You may think he's not letting him get away with it. He's calling it out as a lie. But instead of letting him just throw one thing after another in succession, stop him on the first point. He says something that's not true. As soon as he wants to go to the next statement, stop him dead right there. And just say, wait, don't talk over him. Do whatever you have to do to not listen. Just talk over him so much to get him to come back to that first point. Let's deal with one point at a time. So he says, "Oh, the Democrats are steadfastly trying to pack the court." Absolutely not true. Get him to supply his evidence. Go back, like I said before. Ask him the question. Support that. Who is doing that? Who's supporting that? Did Biden say he was going to do that? Because the reality is Biden said at the outset, before he was even elected, no, I'm not going to do that. And he has not wavered on that. And I don't know of anyone who's trying to get that to happen. I haven't even heard a discussion about it. So it just seems preposterous that he's making that claim. But stop and get him to defend that position. Oh, I didn't know that. Tell me who's saying that. And then when he comes up empty and he can't get specific, it makes him look like a fool. And that's a good thing. If he's lying, he should be called out on it. I found it hilarious when Lowry said, "You won't criticize your own side." I wish somebody had stepped in. I would have loved for Bill to have stepped in and just said, "By the way, when tonight have you criticized your side?" Because I never heard anything from him. So it's a little hypocritical there. The other thing I wanted to kind of clarify, it was really hard to pick it up because they were talking over each other so much. But Lowry was trying to point out, I don't know if you caught this, but Lowry was trying to point out that Biden originally said, I can't sign an executive order to fix the border. Congress has to do it. And Lowry was saying for 3.5 years he said that. And then when it was clear that Congress wasn't going to do it, what happened? Oh, he signed an executive order as though Biden was lying all for 3.5 years. He could have done it all along and just didn't want to, and then signed it. That's very specious and that's very disingenuous because, and I wish somebody had pointed out, the reality of what Biden was doing. Biden wanted a strong bill. I can't get into the details. I don't know the details, quite frankly. But what he wanted to do is have a strong package, which the Republicans negotiated, as Avalon pointed out. He wanted to have that strong bill passed, and that's what he was waiting for. He was afraid that if he just signed the one that he ultimately did, then they'd say, we don't need that. You already signed something. So he was holding out for something powerful, and he didn't get that. And then when he realized that he couldn't get what he wanted, he settled for what he could do, which was a much more timid border executive order. So that was very disingenuous. Lowry has got to know better than that. And he's just trying to make Biden out to look bad. I wish that had been called out. Oh, and I also just want to quickly say, when you let somebody bulldoze you like that, what happens is it's almost like if somebody punched you in the face, you shouldn't do that. And they punched you again. You ought not do that. And they punch you again. Well, you keep telling them they shouldn't do that, and you're right. But what's the result? You got a bruised up face. And that's what happens in the argument when you let them just say one thing after another. That's why when they hit you the first time, you got to block all the other hits until you reconcile that first one and get to the bottom of it. Okay, the next episode is where they talk about the Supreme Court's immunity decision. Let's listen to that.
The larger issue, obviously, is January 6th, right? And the problem is with the immunity decision, when history is really clear. If you don't hold people accountable when they indulge in political violence, then you get more political violence. And I'm really curious about do you think conservatives will end up supporting the constitutional amendment to overturn the immunity decision if a Democrat is president? I wonder if they will.
I think the way these kind of decisions work, we saw it with the independent counsel statute decision the Supreme Court has. In Washington, eventually this stuff always comes around and bites the other side. So right now, Democrats are so upset the Supreme Court has done this. Then if Kamala Harris is elected and some Republican prosecutor somewhere in the middle of red America wants to indict her and prosecute her for some official act, the Supreme Court will say no, and Democrats will suddenly, wait a minute, maybe that decision wasn't so outrageous.
Yeah, I'll tell you, what we've seen is this tendency on both ends of the political spectrum to score partisan points at the expense of confidence in our institutions.
Yeah, but Trump really does commit crime. Let's not forget that little part.
Okay. So on this immunity decision, Lowry actually makes an excellent point. It is very tempting to look at the Supreme Court decision and just in terms of how it would affect Trump. And, we all know all the stuff that Trump has done that that people want him to be held accountable for. But you do have to be circumspect, and the Supreme Court, it is a responsibility not just to look at him, but look at it in general. And you don't want your political enemies sitting there going after and using the legal system to punish their political opponents. So you do have to be careful. What they left out was this one clause that the Supreme Court left in there, or put in there, that said you can't look at the president's motives. This is why Sotomayor said, so he can use SEAL Team 6 to assassinate one of his opponents, and he's got immunity because that's an official act. And she's absolutely right on that. If you can't look at motive, then you look at it, is the president in charge, in control of, in command of the Army, and the Navy, and the Marines, and all that? Are all of our armed services? Absolutely. Does he get to tell them what to do? Absolutely. So if he makes a decision involving them, that's an official act. And if you can't take his motives into account, then you have to give him immunity to that. And that's absurd. So that clause, you can't look at motivation, is what makes that decision so heinous. And so reckless, and they don't point that out here. So while Lowry makes an excellent point in general, he left out that one little clause. Okay. So the next in this next segment, H.R. McMaster tries to show his balance when assessing Trump's foreign policy, and I'll point out how he really establishes his bias instead. Let's listen in.
They can't stand Donald Trump, and not being on board with Donald Trump. I do not get conservative Republicans supporting Kamala Harris. That does.
Okay, right there, that statement. I can't see Republicans supporting Kamala Harris. It's like, what's all this integrity stuff they keep talking about? That single statement from him says so much about him that he can't begin to identify with somebody objecting to a candidate based on principle and character and overall qualification versus just, oh, they're on my side. That to come out and say that was striking, and that tells you a lot about this guy.
But hold on, but let's work through it. It's not just about, right? It's about one person wants to strengthen NATO and all the multilateral security arrangements that have helped keep the peace for the most part since the Second World War. The other wants to sell out to a lot of these autocratic countries. That's a personal, not political decision. I think that's actually consistent. Also, I think it's healthy because I think you get more Republicans endorsing Democrats. It makes the point that this election is about something bigger. It's about building a broad patriotic coalition.
The U.S. military was stronger and out when Trump was done with his first term, and he was actually, he said a lot of dumb things about Putin, but he supported Ukraine more than Obama did, and he was harder on China than any prior president, and now that position has become unbiased.
We have someone who...
Well, this is a big part of the book. He actually did. He's the first one who provided defensive capabilities to
I try to tell you guys, we don't believe until HR says it.
But then he did suspend that assistance to get dirt on the Bidens. You said I wouldn't say reckless. I would say inconsistent, erratic versus fecklessness. And I do think that when you talk about coddling authoritarian regimes, look at what this administration has done with the Iranians. The supreme leader has gotten an easy ride from the Biden administration. They didn't even want to acknowledge Iran's role in October 7th at the beginning.
Okay, fact check there. According to my research, Biden, in a speech on October 7th, said Iran was behind it, or he made that connection. So I don't know how soon you want Biden to do it. Maybe the day before. Sorry if the same day isn't fast enough for you.
They still have not really reimposed or actually enforced the sanctions against the Iranians since October 7th, and with them having the whole Middle East on fire. So I think it's a more complicated situation is what I'm saying, John.
But
you can't just make these
hold on, HR. I love you, man, but hold on. We've got one guy saying we should pull out of NATO, right? We should not. Putin can do whatever the hell he wants. Basically, giving a yellow light to China on Taiwan. The autocratic alliance you warn about is in many cases rooting for Donald Trump because they think it leads to American division and decline. Tell me where I'm wrong.
Well, what I'm saying is there were some things, right? There's some things where Donald Trump's right. There's some things where he's right. There's some things where he's completely erratic and inconsistent. Where does he right on? I think he's been right on energy security, for example. I think he's been right on reciprocity and trade. He's been right on burden sharing. But then again, with Donald Trump, he's so disruptive, right? He disrupts what needs to be disrupted sometimes, but then he goes on to disrupt himself. And he becomes kind of the antagonist in his own story. So, so you've got a choice, right? In this election, people have to make the choice between what I would say are really self-destructive policies at times for the Biden administration on the Middle East, on the war in Israel, but really the war in the region, and kind of the erratic nature of President Trump. But these are the questions these candidates have to be asked. What are their positions on these issues? On NATO, on Ukraine, on the war in the Middle East?
But I think this.
Okay, so first of all, one thing that holding people accountable, Avalon makes some good points, and he says to McMaster, tell me where I'm wrong. McMaster totally avoids that and starts saying, well, what I'm saying is, it's like, wait, before you tell me, stop him right there. As soon as you hear those words, stop him and say, hold on, we want to hear what you have to say, but can you answer my question? Where was I wrong? Get him to acknowledge what you just said, because the other side doesn't. This was what Bill was just saying. How everything's got to be maximalist. You've got to ignore any good point the other person says and just win. And so you point out all your good stuff. And just ignore or minimize what the other side says. And that we can get a better breakthrough in this country in our dialogue if each side could start acknowledging the points. Bill is one reason he is so highly respected is he acknowledges the point that somebody who disagrees with, or, if somebody takes a position opposite to his, if they make a good point, even though he may not be swayed totally completely by it, but if they make a good point, he acknowledges it. And Jon Stewart is somebody who does the same thing. That's why they garner a lot of respect. And we can get a lot more respectable dialogue if we can kind of start compelling people to do that. So if you're in a discussion with somebody, compel them to acknowledge what you're saying before they move on. Okay, this is one thing that I found so amusing. McMaster is sitting here trying to show how balanced he is. Well, Trump does some things right and some things wrong. So energy security is for that. He's for trade reciprocity, getting NATO members to, pay up on their fair share. Oh, but those are good things. But then, he could do some bad things. He disrupts himself. Talk about a softball, that's what he does wrong? Okay, let's talk about some of the wrongs that we all know that Trump did. In 2017, he disclosed classified Israeli intelligence to the Russian diplomats. In 2021, he discussed sensitive info about our nuclear submarines during a public dinner. He refuses to read his daily security briefings, and he believed our enemy Putin instead of his own intelligence agency. Oh, but he agrees that we need a good energy policy, or we need energy security. I mean, it's like, okay, is my dog a good dog? Well, he does some things good. He does some things not so good. Today, he fetched my paper. That was a good thing. Yesterday, he mauled my neighbor's toddler. That was not so much of a good thing. Okay, but he's a balanced dog. Some things he does good, some things he does no good. Give me a break. I mean, that argumentation, the examples he gave, was as ridiculous as that example I just gave about my dog. I mean, it's beyond ridiculous. So I'm guessing, he's trying to sell a book to as many people as possible. So he wants to come across as, oh, look at how balanced I am. I can see the good and bad in people. And it's a disservice to put the goods and the bads together as though they're on equal footing and equally as impactful and powerful and important is a joke. Anyway, the final segment here talks about our withdrawal from Afghanistan.
More than I do, but the hit on Soleimani, I think, was shocking. It wasn't a major war. One hit, one guy. I think everyone with American blood on their hands around the world slept less easily after that hit. And it just went to the fact that he had deterrent force. People were scared or worried about him in a way they haven't been of Joe Biden.
Look, the bipartisan consensus in more American foreign policy is we should stand up against tyrants and terrorists, right? And I do believe that. And I do think that we learned a lot in the wake of the Iraq war. But the fact is that right now, if you're strong on national security, one party's leader seems to be trying to weaken NATO, and the other party has expanded it and strengthened it.
A lot of that is working them to try to get them to spend more. But I don't see the Afghan withdrawal, does this compute at all in your?
There's no reason Pompeo should have negotiated with the Taliban alone in Doha.
But it was a conditions-based thing. Biden didn't accept anything else that Trump did, except he was supposedly forced by Trump to do a withdrawal.
It was done badly.
Totally incompetent, dishonorable, a disgrace. His presidency has not recovered from it since, and our position abroad hasn't recovered.
And I think you can draw a direct line from that disastrous, humiliating withdrawal to the reinvasion of Ukraine in February 2022. I mean,
okay, that's ridiculous. As though if the Afghanistan withdrawal had been smooth, Putin would have said, I don't need Ukraine after all. Come on, anyone who knows anything about the Soviet Union and Putin, and he wants to reestablish the Soviet Union. That's pretty clear. And he started with Crimea, and then the next step was Ukraine. And if he gets that, it's pretty clear he'll keep moving. To say that the Afghanistan withdrawal was the key factor is ridiculous. He should know better than that. He's either completely incompetent, doesn't know anything about history, which I very much doubt, or he's just being very disingenuous. That's ridiculous.
And I think what's weakness is what is provocative is the perception of weakness. So, what I would love to hear from both candidates is
and if I may,
okay, good Monday morning quarterbackers. This is what I love, and doesn't get called out anywhere. The idea that, this was such a disaster. Do you ever hear anybody say what they would have done differently? Do you hear anyone say, well, if I were in that situation, I would have had this information, which Biden had, and this information clearly indicates they should have done this? No. They were as surprised by that as anyone would be. And actually, we shouldn't have been all that surprised that it would have been difficult. Maybe that we didn't expect it to be that fast. We thought we'd at least be able to get out of there before the Taliban took over. But you get a situation where you've got a country that has not known freedom. They've always known control and being controlled. And the Americans come in and say, we're going to train you to defend your government. So, we'll take your uniforms, and we like these nice shiny tanks to ride around in, and we like the money you're giving us, you're paying us to be in the Afghanistan army. Sure, they're going to go along with that. It's a good deal. It's a good gig. But do you really expect for that, because you do that they're going to then stand up for themselves? That was a bit much. I think it wasn't that hard to really anticipate that Afghanistan army wouldn't hold up. But the fact that the president of Afghanistan ran with his tail between his legs immediately, that I'm sure significantly precipitated that quick takeover by the Taliban. And I don't think, for them to sit back and be Monday morning quarterbackers saying, that was a disaster, that shouldn't have happened, it's all his fault. He's using the president has to rely on the intelligence he's given. And our intelligence agency predicted it would take 6 months. We had plenty of time to get out of there before the Taliban would take over. That's what they were telling him. So he made a decision based on that. That's what more can you expect? And to simply say, look, a bad thing happened and you were in charge, so therefore it's your fault, is specious, ridiculous. And for somebody who's a retired lieutenant general who worked as a national security, for the National Security Agency, as the national security advisor, rather, to Trump, his bias is just showing here. I mean, this is his opportunity to be balanced and to talk about the nuances and how hard it was, but he's sitting there emphasizing what a blunder it was, as though he would have done something differently if he were in charge. I would have loved for the withdrawal to have happened on his watch. The same thing would have happened. And it's disingenuous, it's ridiculous, and I really wish I could have heard that get called out in this program. Anyway, that's it. I hope you enjoyed what you heard, and I'll be back for another episode.